47 women walked into that throne room. Every single one of them brought something. Gold, land, soldiers, bloodlines that stretched back centuries. They came dressed in silks that cost more than entire villages, their hair pinned with jewels that caught the candlelight and threw it across the stone walls like scattered stars. They came prepared, rehearsed, certain that what they carried was enough. None of them made him look twice. King Calum Voss sat on his throne the way a mountain sits on the earth, without effort, without apology, without any awareness that the world around it is waiting for it to move. His jaw was cut from shadow and old scar tissue. His eyes were the color of winter ice over deep water, pale, fractured, and completely still. The iron crown on his head carried no jewels, no decoration, just cold black metal pressed against dark hair, and the weight of 300 years wearing it down into his skull. Hi, viewers. If a king who felt absolutely nothing for 3 centuries suddenly felt something for a girl who brought him bread instead of gold, would you trust that feeling? Drop your answer in the comments right now, because this story is about to show you exactly what that looks like. The herald's voice bounced off the stone pillars and died somewhere in the rafters. Another name. Another woman gliding forward across the polished floor, her movements rehearsed to a flawless, bloodless precision. This one came from the Northern Territories. Her dowry was 3 border regions, a silver mine, and 500 wolves pledged to the crown. The court murmured the way courts always murmur approval, wrapped in envy, wrapped in performance. Calum's fingers did not move on the armrest. The woman reached the base of the dais. She lowered herself into a curtsy deep enough to make her spine ache, and lifted her eyes to his with the calculated confidence of someone who had practiced this moment in front of mirrors for months. He looked through her. She felt it. The whole room felt it. The murmuring collapsed into silence so complete that the candles overhead seemed louder, the soft, steady sound of wax burning down. His advisor, Lord Aldrich Penn, leaned from his position at the throne's right and pressed his voice low against the king's ear. "My king, she is considered the finest available match across 4 territories." Calum said nothing. Lord Penn straightened, made a note. The woman was guided away. The court reset itself with the mechanical efficiency of something that had performed this exact sequence 46 times before today. The herald cleared his throat and prepared the 48th name. 300 years. That was how long the throne room of Dorveth had been holding these audiences. 300 years of women arriving with everything the world considered valuable, and 300 years of the Alpha King sitting exactly where he sat now, unmoved, unwarmed, unreachable. His wolf had gone quiet inside him so long ago that Calum had stopped thinking of it as a living thing. It was architecture now. A room inside him with the doors sealed and the windows shuttered and no light coming through. The court did not know this. They believed what courts always believe, that the right woman with the right offer would eventually unlock what money and politics had failed to. That the king's stillness was preference, not absence. That somewhere behind those winter-pale eyes, something was waiting to be found. They were wrong, or they had been, because the doors at the far end of the hall opened without announcement, without permission, without a herald or attendants or a single piece of gold to justify the interruption, and the 48th woman was not a woman the court had any record of at all. And Calum Voss, for the first time in 300 years, sat forward in his throne. Just barely, just an inch, but the room noticed. And nobody, not Lord Penn, not the assembled nobility, not the 47 women who had already been dismissed, could explain why a girl in a mud-brown dress, carrying nothing but a cloth bag, had just done what 3 centuries of wealth and power and careful calculation had failed to do. Nobody except Calum, and even he didn't have the words for it yet. She didn't glide. She didn't float. She walked. Steady, unhurried steps that hit the stone floor with quiet purpose, like someone who had somewhere to be, and had decided the distance between the door and the throne was simply ground to be covered. No performance, no ceremony, just forward motion in worn leather boots that had seen real roads and real weather and real work. The court locked up around her like a body going cold. 2 guards broke from the columns before she reached the 3rd pillar, big men in full iron plate, hands already reaching, already certain this was a simple matter of removal. They moved fast. She didn't stop, didn't speed up, didn't flinch when the first guard's hand shot out and grabbed her arm hard enough to leave a mark. She stays. The words came out of Calum's mouth before his mind had approved them. He did not examine this. There was no time, and he had no language for what had just happened in his chest. Something fast and hard, and gone before he could catch it, like a door slamming open in a room he believed had been permanently sealed. The guard released her arm and stepped back with confusion, written plainly across his face. She kept walking. She reached the base of the dais and stopped. No curtsy, no downcast eyes, no carefully rehearsed expression designed to communicate availability and deference and the appropriate degree of beauty. She simply stopped and looked at him directly, steadily, the way a person looks at something they are trying to understand, rather than something they are trying to impress. Her eyes were dark, riverstone dark, and they held his without a single tremor. He should have looked away. Any king would have looked away by now. Looking too long was its own kind of statement, and Calum Voss had not made statements with his eyes in 3 centuries. He didn't look away. Lord Penn stepped forward with his voice clipped and precise. "You are not on the registry. You will identify yourself immediately and explain how you entered this." "Elara Voss," she said. The hall went very still. Not because of the name, it was a common enough name in the outer regions, but because of how she said it. No apology in it. No nerves underneath it. Just the name, standing on its own, needing nothing to prop it up. "From the village of Crestven." She paused. "I didn't come to be chosen." The silence in the room changed shape. It became something heavier. 47 women who had come to be chosen stood in various corners of that silence, and the weight of it pressed differently on each of them. "Then why?" Calum said, and his own voice sounded foreign to him, rougher than it should have been, stripped of its usual distance. "Are you here?" She looked at him for 1 full second before she answered. 1 second in which the candles burned, and the court held its breath, and something behind Calum's sternum did something it had not done in 300 years. It moved. "Because you looked hungry," she said. "And everyone else in this room has been pretending not to notice." The air left the hall. 47 women. Dozens of court officials. Lord Penn, who had served 3 generations of advisors before him and believed himself immune to surprise. Every single one of them heard those words land and felt the room rearrange itself around them. Calum did not move, but his eyes, those pale, fractured, winter-still eyes, sharpened on her face with an intensity that had nothing courtly in it, nothing managed. It was the look of something that has been asleep for a very long time and has just registered, for the first time, a sound worth waking for. He looked at her bruises then. Left eye, a cut still healing at the corner. Right cheekbone, a shadow of yellow-green that spoke to something days old. Her hands, where they hung at her sides, carried the evidence of work, real work, the kind done with soil and stone and effort, not ceremony. Someone in the court whispered. Penn inhaled sharply and opened his mouth. "Lord Penn," Calum said. Penn closed his mouth. Calum looked at Elara. "What is in the bag?" She reached into the cloth bag at her hip, and what she pulled out, what she held up in both hands in the cold throne room of Dorveth, before 47 women who had brought gold and bloodlines, and entire armies pledged in their names, was a loaf of bread, dense, dark. The crust cracked along the top, still faintly warm. The court did not breathe. And Calum Voss, Alpha King of Dorveth, who had felt nothing for 300 years, felt his wolf, that sealed, silent, long-abandoned thing, open its eyes for the first time. It looked straight at her, and it did not look away. She stepped up onto the first stone of the dais without asking. No one gave her permission. No one stopped her. The guards looked at the king. The king did not look at the guards. His pale eyes were on her and only her, tracking every inch of her movement with the focused, unblinking attention of something that has finally found the one thing in a very large room that matters. The court was a held breath. The court was a room full of people who had stopped existing as individuals and become, collectively, a single stunned witness. Elara climbed the dais steps. 1, 2, 3. She stopped 2 feet from the throne and held the bread out with both hands. Warm, dense. The smell of wood smoke and dark rye rising off it, and underneath that something sweeter. Fennel, maybe, or the ghost of honey worked into the crust. A smell so ordinary it was almost violent in this room full of perfume and politics, and carefully constructed wealth. She did not look away from his face. He did not look away from hers. This close, she could see things the distance had hidden. The old scar that crossed the left side of his jaw. Not from battle, from something that had been done slowly and deliberately. The way the skin around his eyes was tight, Not from age, but from 3 centuries of holding an expression that said nothing, feeling nothing, giving nothing. The way his hands gripped the armrests of the throne, not relaxed, never relaxed. The grip of a man who had been bracing against something for so long he'd forgotten it was possible to let go. She kept the bread extended. He didn't move. 3 seconds. 5. The silence in the room had gone past uncomfortable into something else entirely. A silence with pressure behind it, the kind that builds before something breaks. Then his hand moved. Not fast. Not the controlled, deliberate motion of a king making a calculated gesture. His hand moved the way hands move when the body decides before the mind does forward, reaching, closing around the loaf. And her fingers were underneath his for 1/2 second. Her warm, rough-palmed hands beneath his scarred ones. The bread between them like something sacred neither of them had a name for. She released it. The cold came back the moment her skin left his. It always came back. 300 years had taught him that cold was the baseline, the default, the only reliable state of the world. But this time something stayed behind. A warmth that had no right to be there and was there anyway, pressed into the bones of his hand like a brand that doesn't burn, just marks. Just changes the shape of the thing it touches permanently and irrevocably and without apology. Mine. The word didn't arrive in his mind like a thought. It arrived like a heartbeat before language, before logic, before 3 centuries of careful distance could build a wall around it. It moved through him the way heat moves through iron, not fast, not flashy, deep and slow and total, reaching places that had been cold for so long they had forgotten the possibility of warmth. His wolf exhaled. That was the only way to describe it. The sealed thing, the shuttered thing, the thing that had been built into architecture and forgotten. It exhaled long and slow and enormous, like a living creature that had been holding a single breath for 300 years and had finally found the reason to let it go. His jaw tightened. The muscle at the corner of it pulled hard. His eyes moved across her face with an intensity that had nothing managed in it, nothing practiced, nothing that could be called composure by any honest measure. It was raw. It was total. It was the look of a man who has spent 3 centuries being certain that the particular warmth he is currently feeling does not exist, and is now holding the proof in his hands that he was wrong. She held his gaze without flinching. The court existed somewhere behind her. Lord Penn existed somewhere behind her. 47 women, and their gold, and their bloodlines, and their pledged armies existed somewhere behind her. None of it reached her. Her eyes were steady and dark and completely present, fixed on his face with the quiet attention of someone who is not afraid of what they are seeing. "What is your name?" he said. His voice came out low, stripped. The king voice, the performance voice, the 3 centuries of managing room's voice gone. What was left was just the voice underneath it, the real one, the one he hadn't heard from himself in longer than he could honestly remember. "Elara," she said, "I told the Lord already. Tell me." A pause. Something moved in her eyes, not fear, and not softness exactly, but something that recognized the difference between the voice he'd used on Lord Penn and the voice he was using now. "Elara," she said again, quieter this time, like a gift given twice. He looked down at the bread in his hands. He looked at it for a long time, this dense, dark, wood smoke and rye ordinary loaf that had just done what 300 years of extraordinary offerings had failed to do. He looked at it the way a man looks at something that has changed the shape of everything he thought he understood about the world. Then he looked back at her. "Where are your bruises from?" he said. The air in the hall shifted. Not the bread, not the wolf, not the warmth that had no right to be in his hand. He had moved straight past all of it, to the thing that had been pulling at something in his chest since the moment she walked in the cut at the corner of her eye, the shadow along her cheekbone, the evidence written across her skin in fading colors that someone had put hands on her, and had done it more than once. She didn't answer immediately. And in the space of that pause, that single breath of hesitation, something settled into Calum Voss with the permanence of stone. Something that was not political and not calculated, and not anything that 3 centuries of careful, managed, deliberate distance had prepared him to deal with. He was not going to let her leave this room unprotected. He had no explanation for this. He had no defense of it. It was simply true the way gravity is true, the way winter is true, pre-rational and total, and not interested in his opinion. "Lord Penn," he said, without looking away from her. "My king." Clear the hall. Silence. Then the sound of the court moving chairs scraping, silk rustling, 47 women, and their escorts, and their dowry chests, and their carefully rehearsed curtsies, all being guided toward the exits by guards, who moved with the speed of men who understood that today something had happened that none of them had a framework for yet. Alara watched the hall empty. She did not move. She did not look away from him. When the last door closed, and the throne room held only the two of them and the low burn of the candles overhead, Calum Voss leaned forward in his throne that single, deliberate inch and said 3 words that had not left his mouth in 300 years. Not an offer, not a command, a beginning. And what he said made Alara's breath stop completely. She stayed, not because he commanded it, though he had. Quietly and with the absolute certainty of a man who has decided something and found the decision easy. She stayed because the 3 words he'd spoken in the empty throne room were still sitting inside her chest, pressing against her ribs with the particular weight of something she hadn't been prepared for and couldn't immediately categorize. She had come to Dorveth for a single reason. Not gold, not status, not the distant, glittering possibility of a crown. She had come because the border wolves that answered to this king's court had been taking more than the tithe from Crestfen for 2 consecutive winters, and the village had sent 3 formal petitions to the crown that had been swallowed by the machinery of the court and produced nothing. She had come because someone had to, and because the people who should have been brave enough weren't. She had not come to feel the Alpha King of Dorveth looking at her like she was the first solid thing he'd put his hands on in 300 years. That was not part of the plan. The East Wing room they gave her was 3 times the size of the house she'd grown up in. Stone walls hung with tapestries in deep blue and gray. A fireplace that could have fit 4 men standing. A bed wide enough to get genuinely lost in. A maid arrived within the hour with water, cloth, and a tray of food she barely touched, because her mind was somewhere else entirely, specifically back in the throne room, replaying 3 words in a voice that had no performance left in it. She pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum, stopped that line of thought. She had work to do. The next morning she learned that the court had its own weather system, a climate of rumor and repositioning that moved fast and hit hard. By the time she walked the corridor to the main hall, she could feel the pressure of eyes that had made decisions about her overnight. Some of those decisions were curious, some were afraid. One specific pair of eyes, belonging to a woman in the 3rd row of the assembled court, dark hair pinned precisely, still as still water in a way that had nothing peaceful in it, were doing something else entirely. Calculating, Alara noted the woman the way she noted exits, filed her, moved on. Lord Penn intercepted her before she reached the hall's entrance. He was a tall man built like a long day's bad news, and he had the face of someone who had been managing difficult situations for so long that difficult had become his resting state. "The king requests your presence," he said. Not warmly, not coldly. Neutrally, which in its own way was more informative than either. "Where?" she said. "The receiving room. Now." She followed him through 3 corridors, and down a half staircase, and into a room that was not the throne room, smaller, lower-ceilinged, warmer. Maps covered the central table. Territorial maps. Real ones, marked with pencil and age, and the evidence of actual use, not display. Calum stood at the table's edge with his back to the door. He didn't turn when she entered, but his shoulders shifted barely, the way a compass needle shifts, and she understood that he had known the exact moment she crossed the threshold. "Close the door," he said. Penn closed it from the outside. She walked to the table and stood across from him. He turned then, and she took in his face in the morning light that came through the narrow windows, harder light than candlelight, less forgiving, the kind that shows the real shape of things. He looked the same. He also looked different. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there yesterday, or rather, something had been added to the stillness. A layer, an awareness that sat behind the pale winter ice color and watched her with an attention she could feel like a hand at the back of her neck. "You were asked to remain in the East Wing," he said. "I was given a room in the East Wing," she said. "No one told me to stay in it." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. The shadow of one. The memory of one, maybe. "The court will have questions," he said. "The court will have opinions," she said. "Those aren't the same thing." He looked at her. The map table was between them, and it was not enough distance for the way he was looking at her, that focused, total, barely managed attention that made the air in the room feel close. "Lady Marin Aldrich has filed a formal objection to your presence," he said. "She has standing to do it. 3 territories and a silver mine purchase a certain amount of standing. What kind of objection?" The kind that requires me to either dismiss you publicly or establish your place within the court structure." He paused. "I am not dismissing you." The words were quiet. They were also absolute, the kind of absolute that comes from somewhere past decision, from somewhere where a thing has already been settled, and the speaking of it is only documentation. She held his gaze. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because Crestfin's petitions were received," he said. "I read them this morning. All 3. Another pause. Heavier. "I did not know they had been stopped." The breath she took was careful. Controlled. She had spent months building careful and controlled, because the alternative, the anger, the fear, the specific grief of 2 winters watching people she loved go without, because the system that was supposed to protect them had simply chosen not to, was not something she could afford to carry into a room like this. She carried it anyway. She just didn't let it move. "What happens now?" she said. "I send riders to Crestfin today," he said. "Border enforcement will be addressed before the week is out." She stared at him. "That's it?" she said. "That's all it took?" "I walked in here with bread, and in 24 hours, 3 petitions that went unanswered for 2 winters are suddenly—" "The petitions were answered," he said. His voice was level, but something underneath it wasn't. They were answered incorrectly, by people who should not have been in positions to answer them. That will also be addressed. The room was quiet. She looked at the maps between them, at the territorial lines drawn and redrawn in pencil, the evidence of ongoing decisions about where power lived and what it owed to the people living inside its boundaries. "She stays," he had said in the throne room. Not a request, not a negotiation. She had heard it land on the court like a stone dropped from a great height. She looked up at him. He was already looking at her. He had not stopped looking at her since she entered the room, and she was beginning to understand that this was not something he was doing casually. There was nothing casual about Calum Voss. Everything he did had been deliberate for so long that deliberate had become his natural state. But the way he looked at her did not feel deliberate. It felt like something that was happening to him rather than something he was choosing. "There's a woman in the 3rd row," Alara said. "Dark hair, very still. She was watching me this morning in a way that wasn't the same as everyone else." Something shifted in his face. "Lady Vespera Nail. Who is she?" He was quiet for 1 beat too long. "Someone we will discuss later," he said. And the way he said later, the specific, weighted quality of it, told her more than the name had. There was history in that word. There was something large and carefully kept in that word. Something that had been living in this castle longer than she had been alive. She filed it. She filed the woman in the 3rd row. She filed the maps and the unanswered petitions, and the 3 words he'd said in the empty throne room, and the way his hand had covered hers for 1/2 second around a loaf of bread. She did not examine what she was doing with all of this information. She was not ready to do that yet. She nodded once and turned toward the door. "Alara." She stopped, did not turn. "Eat something today," he said. "The tray in your room. You haven't touched it." She stood very still for a moment. Then she left without answering, and she did not let herself think, until she was 3 corridors away, and completely alone, about the fact that he had somehow known. She found the library on her 2nd night in Dorveth. Not the one they'd shown her during the brief. The efficient tour Lord Penn had conducted with the energy of a man, completing a task on a list, the grand library on the 3rd floor, with its matched spines and gold lettering on the shelves, and the feeling of a room that existed to be seen rather than used. She found the other one, the one behind the door that didn't announce itself, set at the bottom of a half staircase off a corridor most people seemed to walk past without registering. The door opened on a room that smelled like paper and cold stone and old candle wax, and felt like a room that had been useful for a very long time and was comfortable with that. The shelves here were not matched. Some books had no spines at all, just stacked pages held together with cord, or pressure, or stubbornness. The candles on the small table in the corner were burned to various heights, none of them replaced. This was not a room anyone prepared for guests. She sat on the floor between 2 shelves, cross-legged, with 3 books open around her, and her own candle set close enough that any sensible person would have moved it further away. She was not thinking about the candle. She was thinking about the curse. She had been thinking about the curse since her first night in Dorveth, specifically about the fact that no one inside this castle seemed to be thinking about it at all. The court talked around it. Lord Penn referenced it in the careful, sideways language of someone describing a permanent condition, something to be managed rather than solved. The The servants she had spoken to in hallways and at mealtimes spoke of it with the resigned familiarity of people who had been born inside it and expected to die inside it. 300 years. And in 300 years, no one had asked the right question. Ilara had a theory about curses, not from formal study. Crestvin didn't run to formal study, but from the particular lateral logic that develops in people who grow up problem-solving with limited resources. Curses were not weather. Weather happened to you. Curses were architecture. Someone built them, which meant they had structure, which meant the structure had load-bearing points. Find the right load-bearing point, remove it, and the whole thing came apart. Everyone who had come to break this curse had come looking for something large, a sacrifice, a prophecy, a bloodline with the right heritage and enough raw power to break the working by force. She was looking for something small, something specific, something the original curse worker would have chosen precisely because it seemed unremarkable. An anchor. The book in her left hand was a record of Dorveth's historical court, 3 centuries old. The ink faded to brown at the edges. The book in front of her was a theoretical text on bound workings that she'd found 2 shelves back and was working through slowly because the author had the particular genius of someone who was also completely unable to write a clear sentence. The third book, open to her right, was a genealogical record. Family lines, marriages, bloodlines, the long, careful accounting of who came from where. She was cross-referencing. She didn't hear him come in. She heard the candle flame change a shift in the air that preceded the awareness of him by 2 full seconds, and she went still with her finger on the page and her eyes on the text before she registered what the stillness was a response to. Most people find the East Wing comfortable enough. His voice came from behind her left shoulder, and it was the voice from the map room rather than the throne room voice, low, stripped of its formal distance, closer to the real one. She did not startle. She had trained herself out of startling a long time ago. Startling got people hurt. Most people aren't looking for something, she said, without turning. A pause. Then the sound of him moving not toward her, not away, parallel to her, stopping at the shelf to her right, and the particular quality of the silence that followed was not the silence of someone who had stumbled across something unexpected. It was the silence of someone who had found what they were looking for and was not sure what to do about that now that they had it. She turned a page. He stayed at the shelf. She could feel the weight of his presence the way you feel the specific pressure of weather before it arrives, directional, certain, carrying something in it that the air around it doesn't carry. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "The anchor." She said it without theater. A fact being stated, available for use. Every bound working has one. Something the curse is tied to something it needs to sustain itself. The working is architecture. Find the anchor. The architecture falls. She paused, turning another page. No one seems to have looked for yours. The silence that followed had weight in it. He stepped closer, not a conscious step, not the deliberate movement of a man making a decision, but the kind of movement that happens when attention is pulled and the body follows before the mind has finished the sentence. He stopped when he was close enough that if either of them reached sideways, they would close the distance completely. Neither of them reached. The candle between them threw its unsteady warmth across the open pages across her hands, her forearms, the dark line of her braid against her shoulder, and across the edge of his jaw. She saw when she finally looked up, the scar catching the light the way scars do, holding it differently than the skin around it, a permanent record of a moment that had been deliberate and damaging, and someone else's choice. Their eyes met. He was not looking at the book. He had not been looking at the book. She looked at him, and he looked at her. And the space between them was small and completely loud, with everything that neither of them was saying, the bread and the throne room and the map room, and I did not know they had been stopped, and eat something, and the half-second of warm, rough-palmed contact around a loaf of rye, and the 3 words he'd said in the empty hall that she still had not fully processed. All of it lived in that small, loud space. She was the first to look back at the book, not because she wanted to, because one of them had to, and she was better at making herself do necessary things than she suspected he was, right now, in this moment. "The anchor won't be obvious," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "It'll be something that's been here long enough to look like it belongs, something the court stopped questioning." She paused. Something or someone with a reason to keep the curse intact. She felt him go still beside her. A different kind of still than the throne room still. This one had sharp edges. "Say that again," he said. She looked up at him. Someone, she said, with a reason to keep it intact. He exhaled slowly. Something moved behind his eyes, not surprise, but recognition. The specific, costly recognition of something you have been looking directly at for a long time without seeing it clearly. Lady Vespera Nael, she said quietly. Third row, very still. Has been in this court for 300 years, he said. His voice had gone flat and hard and quiet in the way that things go quiet right before they become very loud. I need to confirm it, she said. I need 3 more days with these records. She looked at the genealogical text. But Calum, she stopped. She had used his name, not his title. Not my king or your majesty, or any of the architecture of rank that everyone else in this castle wrapped around him like a second crown. Just his name, dropping out of her mouth in the low light of the hidden library with the candle burning between them. He did not correct her. He was looking at her with those pale, fractured eyes, and the thing in them had changed again, had shifted into something that was not the throne room look, and was not the map room look, and was not anything she had a ready category for. It was open in a way that she suspected he did not know how to close anymore, and it was looking at her with a focus so complete that the rest of the room had essentially stopped existing. 3 days, he said. His voice was quiet and certain. Whatever you need. She nodded, looked back at the book. He did not leave immediately. He stood at the shelf a moment longer, 1 breath, 2, and she kept her eyes on the page and felt the specific quality of that nearness, the way you feel, something that you know is not going to stay but has not left yet. Then he stepped back. She heard his footsteps toward the door, controlled, deliberate. The sound of a man putting distance between himself and something he doesn't trust himself to stand too close to. The door opened, paused. Ilara. She looked up. He was at the threshold, his face half in candlelight and half in the dark corridor, and he said nothing for a moment. Just looked at her across the low, warm room with all its disorganized shelves and its stubborn candles and its 300 years of questions no one had been asking. Be careful who you trust in this castle, he said, until we know more. She held his gaze. Including you? She said. The corner of his mouth moved, that not smile again, the shadow of one. Especially me, he said. And then he was gone, and the room was just a room again, and Ilara sat very still with her finger on the page, and her candle burning, and the genealogical record open to the Nael family line, which, she was now reading clearly for the first time, did not begin 300 years ago. It began 300 years and 1 month ago, 1 month before the curse. She stared at the date. Then she reached for her notes and began writing fast, because somewhere in this castle, a woman in the 3rd row with 3 centuries of patience and a reason to keep everything exactly as it was had just become something far more dangerous than a person with an opinion. She had become a target. And targets, in Ilara's experience, had a way of finding out they were being aimed at before you were ready for them to know. The date sat on the page like a loaded gun. Ilara had stared at it for 3 minutes without moving 1 month before the curse, the Nael family line appearing in Dorveth's records as though it had always been there, as though 3 centuries of court history had simply absorbed it and stopped asking questions about its origin. She had been in this hidden library for 2 nights running, and she had found things that no one else had bothered to find, because no one else had been looking with the right question in their hands. She brought it to Calum at dawn, not through Lord Penn, not through channels. She walked directly to the war room, where one of the night guards had told her the king could usually be found before the court assembled, and she pushed the door open without knocking, and put the genealogical record flat on the table in front of him, before he had finished turning around. Look at the date, she said. He looked at the date. The room went very quiet. He was still in the clothes from the night before, no crown, no formal coat, just a dark shirt with the sleeves pushed to his elbows, and the particular, worn-down look of a man who does not sleep much, and has made peace with that. He leaned over the record. His eyes moved across the page with the focused speed of someone who reads not for pleasure but for information, stripping a text down to its structure, the way you strip a mechanism down to its working parts. He straightened slowly. 1 month, he said. 1 month before the curse began, the Nael bloodline appears in Dorveth's court records for the first time. Ilara kept her voice level. No prior mention, no record of arrival. They simply exist in the documentation, as though they were always here. And then 1 month later, the curse begins, and then they never leave. She paused. 300 years, The same family, the same court position. Third row. He turned away from the table, walked to the narrow window, stood with his back to her and his hands at his sides, and his shoulders carrying something she could see from across the room, the specific, physical weight of a realization that changes the shape of everything behind it. She was there when it started, he said. She didn't witness it, Elara said. She worked it. He turned. His eyes found hers across the room, and what was in them was not anger, not yet, not the hot, immediate kind. It was colder than that. Slower, the kind that builds in people who have learned that fast anger is a luxury that costs too much. I need you to be certain, he said. I'm not certain yet, she said. I need 2 more sources. There's a record archive below the Eastern Tower Court transactions, curse-era documentation. If the anchor is Vespera, there will be a binding thread somewhere in those records, something that connects her continued presence to the curse's maintenance. She held his gaze. I need access to the archive. You have it, he said, no hesitation. She nodded, reached for the book. His hand came down on the page beside hers, not on her hand. Beside it, 1 inch of cold stone table between their fingers. She went still. Elara, his voice was low. She cannot know you are looking. If Vespera understands what you have found, she'll move first, Elara said. Yes, I know. She looked at his hand beside hers on the page, at the scar across his knuckles, the particular architecture of damage that spoke to 3 centuries of holding on too hard to things that cut. I've been careful. He looked at their hands, hers and his, nearly touching, the book between them carrying 300 years of questions that had finally found someone patient enough to ask them. He looked at it the way he had looked at the bread in the throne room, with that specific, unmanaged attention that had no performance in it. You came here for Crestfin, he said. Not an accusation, a statement, the kind that asks a question without asking it. She met his eyes. Yes, and now you are doing this. Someone has to. A long silence. Why you? He said. She looked at him for a moment. At his face in the gray dawn light, the scar and the crown lines, and the 3 centuries of stillness cracking open at the edges into something she did not have a safe name for. Because I walked into your throne room with bread, she said quietly, and you looked at it like it was the first real thing anyone had handed you in 300 years. A pause. Maybe it was. He said nothing, but his hand moved barely, less than a centimeter, and the side of his little finger came to rest against the side of hers on the cold stone table. Just that. Just contact. Warmth and bone and the smallest possible acknowledgement of everything that had been building between them since the moment she'd walked through those doors without permission. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then she picked up the book, and he stepped back, and the war room was just a war room again. But she carried that half-inch of warmth with her all the way to the Eastern Tower archive. And she was still carrying it 3 hours later, when she found the second source, a binding record, 70 pages deep in documentation no one had touched in 2 centuries, with Vespera Nael's family seal pressed into the wax at the bottom of a contract that should not have existed, a contract that had not expired, a contract that renewed itself, automatically, every decade, as long as the curse held. She read it twice to make sure. Then she closed the book and sat in the dark of the archive with the specific, cold clarity of someone who has just understood that the thing they are hunting has been watching them this entire time. Vespera knew she was looking. She had always known, and she had let it happen. Vespera moved at first light on the 5th day. Elara was 3 steps from the Great Hall's entrance when she heard the doors open behind her, and something in the quality of the sound too coordinated, too many footsteps moving in deliberate formation, made her stop walking before she understood why. She turned. Vespera Nael walked into the morning assembly, with 3 lords at her back, and a court messenger at her side, and a piece of formal parchment in her hand, and her face wore the expression of someone who has been patient for a very long time, and has decided that patience is finished. The hall filled fast. Court assemblies had their own gravity. When something significant was about to happen, the room knew before the people in it did, and within 2 minutes the benches were full, and the standing space behind them was crowded, and the air carried the specific, electric charge of an audience that understands it, is about to witness something that will be discussed for years. Calum was already on the throne. His eyes found Elara the moment she entered, and what moved through them was fast and controlled and visible, only because she had been paying close attention to his face for 5 days, and knew the difference between the managed versions and the real ones. He had known this was coming. He had not had time to stop it. Vespera stopped at the center of the hall, and the court messenger read the charge aloud in the flat, practiced voice of someone performing a function he understands to be significant and wants no personal stake in. The words were formal. The architecture of the accusation was perfectly constructed, 300 years of understanding court law, being deployed with the precision of someone who had been building toward this specific moment for a very long time. The charge was enchantment. Specifically, that Alara of Crestven had used unnatural influence to compromise the Alpha King's judgment, had entered the court under false conditions, and was required by court law to prove her standing through trial by combat. It was legal. Every word of it was within 3 centuries of established precedent, and it was designed precisely so that Calum could not counter it without dismantling the court structure that held Dorveth together. The hall processed the charge in the way halls process things that are both outrageous and technically correct, with noise that started low and built fast, voices cutting across each other, the 3 lords behind Vespera standing with the settled look of men who had already counted their numbers and found them sufficient. Alara stood at the back of the hall and felt the specific, cold shape of a trap that had been set before she arrived. The contract in the archive, the renewed binding. Vespera had not been surprised to be identified. She had been waiting for someone to get close enough to the answer that she had cause to act. Alara was the cause. She looked at Calum on his throne. He was looking at her. He was looking at her the way she had learned to read, not the king look, the real one, the one underneath. And what it said was, "I cannot stop this within the law. Tell me what you need." She looked at Vespera, tall, composed, still in that particular way that was not calm, but the control of someone who has maintained the same lie for 300 years and learned to wear it like a second face. Then she looked back at Calum. She stepped forward through the crowd and into the open floor of the hall, and the noise dropped as bodies registered her movement and adjusted. "I accept," she said. The room broke open. Calum was on his feet before the sound had finished building, not performed, not political, the pure, unmediated reaction of something that had bypassed all 3 centuries of managed distance and come straight from the place where the wolf lived. His hand gripped the throne's armrest and the iron groaned under it, and his silver eyes fixed on her from across the hall, with everything in them that his position would not allow his voice to carry. He stood there, standing when a king should be seated, gripping iron like it owed him something, every line of him fighting the impulse to cross the hall floor and remove her from this situation entirely by whatever means necessary. And Alara turned and looked at him. The hall was loud and getting louder. Penn was trying to establish order. The 3 lords were conferring. Vesper was watching Alara with the composed attention of someone who has already decided how the next hour ends. Alara held Calum's gaze through all of it. 1 breath. 2. She gave him the nod once. The private language. The equal acknowledgement they had been building for 5 days in throne rooms and map rooms, and hidden libraries and half-inches of contact on cold stone tables. "I know what I'm doing. Trust me." He didn't look away. His jaw was iron. His knuckles were white on the armrest. And in his eyes was something that was not trust. Yet trust was too small a word for it, but was the specific, enormous act of a man who has never in 3 centuries put his safety in another person's hands, choosing, right now, to do exactly that. He sat down. Alara turned back to face Vespera. Vespera was smiling. It was a small smile, contained, the smile of someone watching a sequence play out according to plan. She thought she had won already. She thought the combat was formality. She thought the girl from Crestven, who had arrived with bread and disrupted 300 years of careful maintenance, was simply unaware of what she was walking into. She was wrong about that, but she wouldn't know it until tomorrow, when the chalk circle was drawn. And that was exactly what Alara was counting on. He found her in the east corridor an hour before the combat circle opened. She was at the narrow window at the end of the hall, standing still, arms loose at her sides, looking down at the courtyard below where 4 servants were finishing the chalk lines on the dark stone. Her hair was down, no braid, no red cloth, dark waves loose around her shoulders, because she had already thought through every variable, and loose hair was one less thing to pull, one less weight to throw her balance. She heard him before she saw him. The specific weight and cadence of his steps, she had learned it without meaning to. The way you learn the sounds of a house you live in, until the absence of them would be louder than the presence. He stopped beside her at the window. Below, a servant smoothed the last section of chalk with a flat board and stepped outside the circle to examine his work. The courtyard was gray and cold in the early morning light. It looked like what it was, a fighting ground, dressed up with geometric precision. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. "There were other ways to handle it," he said finally. His voice was stripped down to its real register, low and rough-edged, and carrying no distance in it. "Name one that didn't cost you the court," she said. He said nothing. "The court structure is what protects Dorveth," she said. "If you had intervened outside the law, you would have given the three lords grounds to challenge your authority directly. With soldiers already outside the walls, that challenge would not have stayed verbal." She kept her eyes on the courtyard below. "I'm not fragile, Calum, and I'm not walking in there without a plan." "Tell me the plan," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Vespera has been in that court for 300 years, she said. "She knows every move. She has been preparing for a direct confrontation since before either of us was born." A pause. "Which means she is going to fight the way she has always fought, from a position of absolute certainty that she cannot lose. And people who are certain they cannot lose always have the same weakness." "They stop reading the room," he said. "They stop reading the room," she confirmed. He was quiet. Below, the last servant left the courtyard. The chalk circle was complete white and precise against gray stone, 12 feet across, the boundary line clean and certain. "I cannot lose you," he said. It came out quiet. It came out the way things come out when they have been held in too long, and find an exit before they are given permission. Not loud, not dramatic, just present and completely honest, in the way that only things said without planning are completely honest. She turned and looked at him. He was already looking at her. He had been looking at her, and his face in the pale morning light was open, in a way she had watched it work toward for 5 days, the stillness still there, but changed. The architecture of 3 centuries of distance, cracked through at the center, and letting something real show through the gaps. His hand came up, slowly, giving her every second to decide. His palm found the side of her face, not gripping, not claiming, just present, large and warm and absolutely certain, the way hands are certain when they have finally found where they belong. She didn't step back. Her eyes closed, just for a moment, just long enough to take that in the warmth of his hand, the specific weight of being looked at by someone who is seeing you entirely, no part of you edited or managed or reduced to your usefulness. He pressed his forehead to hers. The corridor was cold. The courtyard below was empty. Somewhere in the castle, Vespera Nael was preparing for a combat she believed was already won, and Lord Penn was drafting procedural documents, and the 3 lords with soldiers outside the walls were watching their investment, and none of it reached this corridor, this window, this half-foot of space between Calum Voss and the girl from Crestven, who had walked into his throne room with bread and changed the shape of everything. "I know," she said softly. His exhale was warm against her skin. She opened her eyes, stepped back. 1 step deliberate, not because she wanted the distance, but because one of them had to hold the line, and she was better at it right now than he was. She straightened. Her chin came up. The bone-deep composure settled over her the way it always did when she needed it. Not performance, not armor, just the bedrock quality that had kept her standing through 2 winters of watching Crestven stripped bare and 3 days of navigating a court that wanted her gone. "Stay on the throne," she said. "No matter what happens in that circle, stay on the throne. Your stillness is what holds the court together today." He looked at her. "And after today?" he said. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned toward the staircase. She did not let herself hear the way he said, nothing in response, the specific quality of a silence that is not emptiness, but everything. Every word a man with 300 years of contained distance doesn't yet have the practice of saying out loud. She heard it anyway. She carried it with her down the stairs, and into the morning, and to the edge of the chalk circle. And she did not let it make her hands shake. She could not afford shaking hands today. The combat circle opened at mid-morning. 200 witnesses packed the courtyard walls before the first bell finished ringing. Court members, servants, guards who were technically off rotation and had found reasons to be present anyway. The 3 lords stood together at the north wall with the arranged patience of men who have already decided the outcome and are waiting for the event to confirm their decision. Vespera walked into the circle in a gray coat that moved like water, a long blade at her hip, and the composed, unhurried certainty of someone who has never lost a thing she intended to keep. Ilara walked in 30 seconds later. No coat. Dark-fitted clothes that allowed full range of movement. her arms bare from the elbow down, her dark hair loose. In her right hand, nothing. Her left side was the side that had taken a hit 2 days ago. She had kept it out of the official record and moved carefully enough that only Calum had noticed. Because Calum noticed everything about her that she did not specifically conceal, which she had stopped being surprised by on day 3. She looked at Vespera across the 12-foot circle. Vespera looked back. The small, composed smile was present. The certainty was present. The 300 years of patience and preparation, and careful maintenance of a lie that had cost an entire kingdom its warmth, were present sitting inside that stillness, wearing it like clothes. The signal was given. Vespera moved first. Fast. Precise. The long blade came out and across in a motion so practiced it had no wasted movement in it, no wind-up, no announcement, just the immediate commitment of someone who has decided the fastest path to the end of something is a straight line. Alara stepped left, and the blade passed 2 inches from her right arm. The crowd sound was involuntary, a single sharp exhale from 200 people simultaneously. She kept moving. She did not engage the blade directly. She moved the way water moves around, a rock not stopping, not breaking, finding the path of least resistance, and using it to build momentum. She needed to read Vespera before she committed to anything. She needed to watch the patterns. Watch the weight distribution before each strike. Watch the eyes where they went in the half-second before the body followed. Vespera drove her back. Once, twice, 3 times, controlled, methodical, moving Alara toward the circle's edge, with the precision of someone running a sequence they have rehearsed. The crowd at the south wall shifted nervously. The 3 lords at the north wall did not shift at all. On the 3rd step back, Alara's heel found the chalk line. She stopped. Vespera came in fast and hard, and certain. This was the sequence. This was where the ending began. 300 years of patience arriving at its moment, and Alara moved inside the strike instead of away from it. Inside the arc of the blade, where Vespera's reach became a liability, and her own proximity became the advantage. She was close enough to see Vespera's eyes change. Not much. A flicker. The first real thing those eyes had shown in the entire exchange, the specific, high-voltage shock of someone who has been completely certain and has just found the floor missing. Alara's right hand came up. What came out of her palm was not a blade. It was light gold white, the color of something older than the court, and older than the curse, and older than the careful, deliberate darkness that Vespera had built and maintained across 3 centuries. It came from her hand with the specific, unhurried certainty of something that has been waiting for the right moment with considerably more patience than anyone in this courtyard. It hit Vespera's blade. The blade was gone. Not broken. Not knocked aside. Gone, dismissed from the space it occupied as though it had never been there. The way a window opened lets out a smell that had been building in a closed room for too long. The courtyard went absolutely silent. Vespera stumbled. 1 step back, then 2. Her composure, 300 years of it. That extraordinary, maintained, load-bearing stillness cracked across the center the way glass cracks when the temperature changes too fast. Her eyes went wide. She looked at her empty hand. She looked at Alara. For the first time in 300 years, Vespera Niel looked afraid. On the throne platform above the courtyard's north wall, Calum had not moved in 8 minutes. He had stayed on the throne. He had stayed still. He had done exactly what Alara had asked him to do, and it had cost him more than anything he had been asked to do in 3 centuries, sitting still and watchful, while the one person in the world who had reached past every wall he'd built stood 12 feet away from a woman with 300 years of reason to end her. He had watched every second. He had not looked away once. When the light came from her palm, that gold-white impossible light that the court would spend days trying to name, and never quite manage, something unlocked in his chest. Not metaphor, something physical, something structural. A load-bearing tension that had been holding for so long he had stopped recognizing it as tension, and had accepted it as the shape of his body. It released. Vespera was stepping back. The 3 lords at the north wall were exchanging looks that had lost all their settled patience. Lord Penn had his hand pressed flat against his own sternum, and his mouth slightly open. Alara stood in the center of the circle with the gold-white light fading from her palm, and her chest moving with the controlled, measured breathing of someone who has spent everything, and is refusing to let it show. "Step out of the circle," she said. Her voice was quiet and carried completely. "It's over." Vespera looked at her for a long moment. Then she stepped out of the circle. And the second her foot crossed the chalk line, the courtyard broke open, sound and movement, and the three lords suddenly talking very fast to each other, and Penn calling for order, and 200 witnesses, all trying to process what they had just seen, with the limited vocabulary available to people who have spent 300 years inside a curse, and are only now beginning to understand what that means. Calum came off the throne, not procedurally, not with ceremony or measured steps, or the deliberate pacing of a king making a public movement. He came off the throne the way he had moved in the throne room, when the guard grabbed her arm before thought, before calculation, drawn by something more reliable than either. He was through the chalk line before anyone registered that he had moved. His hand found her arm, her right arm, the uninjured one. He steadied her. She had swayed, barely, the exhaustion finding her now that the necessity of fighting was finished, and she said, "I'm fine," in a voice that was doing its best, and he said, "I know." And neither of them moved and neither of them let go. The courtyard was very loud. Neither of them heard it. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. And standing inside the chalk circle in front of 200 witnesses, and Lord Penn and the three now silent lords, and the empty space where Vespera's blade used to be, the Alpha King of Dorveth held on to the girl from Crestfen, and did not pretend, for the first time in 300 years, that he wanted to let go. But 20 feet away, 2 guards were moving toward Vespera, with official restraint orders that Penn had drafted that morning, and Vespera was watching them approach with an expression that had gone past fear and come out the other side into something else. Something that looked less like surrender, and more like someone who still has one move left on the board and is deciding whether to use it. The curse broke at midnight. No one scheduled it. No one planned the timing or prepared the room or arranged for witnesses. It simply happened the way things happen, that have been ready to happen for a very long time, and were only waiting for the specific condition that had finally been met. Calum was alone in the throne room when it came. The hall was empty and dark. The candles burned to stubs, and he was standing at the narrow window, looking at the courtyard below where the chalk circle was still visible, on the gray stone white lines in the dark, the exact shape of the space where everything had changed. He had sent Penn away an hour ago. He had sent everyone away. He needed the quiet the way he needed air, which was not something he had experienced before today. Before today, he had not needed much of anything. That had changed. The wave hit him at midnight without warning. It moved through him from the ground up total, wall to wall. A warmth so absolute that his body didn't know what to do with it, and his knees went before his mind caught up. He grabbed the window frame. His knuckles went white. His eyes closed. 300 years of sealed rooms inside him opening all at once. It was not quiet. It was not gentle. It was the specific, enormous pain of sensation, returning to something that has been without it for so long that the nerves have forgotten their own language and have to relearn it from the beginning all at once, in a single moment, with no preparation and no mercy. He felt the cold stone under his hands, the night air on his face, the fire behind him, the texture of the iron window frame against his palm. He felt his own heartbeat for the first time in 3 centuries, as something present and real, rather than just biological fact, loud and certain, and moving blood through a body that was finally, after everything, warm. He felt her. Not her presence specifically. Her impression. The specific, irreducible warmth that she had been building in him since the throne room, since the bread, since the library, since the corridor window and the chalk circle and his hand on her face, and her eyes closing just long enough to take something in. All of it was there. All of it arrived at once, and it was the first thing he felt. He pushed off the window frame and walked. Down the corridor, up the east staircase, through the quiet of the castle at midnight where the only movement was the distant sound of 2 guards changing shift somewhere far below. He walked the way he had come off the throne, past deliberate, past managed, pulled by something more honest than either. Her door was not latched. He stopped in the doorway. She was awake. Sitting on the edge of the bed with her bandaged forearm rested against her knee, and a book open in her lap that she was not reading. Her eyes were already on the door when it opened, because she had heard him coming 3 hallways away, and had put the book down and was simply waiting. She looked at his face. She put the book aside. He stepped into the room and stopped in the center of it. The candle on the small table threw low, warm light across everything, and he stood in the middle of that light and looked at her with 300 years' worth of feeling arriving all at once, and nowhere to put any of it, except here, in this room, with her. "It broke," he said. "I know. She had felt it too, the shift moving through the castle, like a tide going out, 3 centuries of weight, lifting off the stone walls simultaneously. I feel everything, he said. Not a complaint, a disclosure. The most careful and enormous thing he had said in 3 centuries, offered without protection or architecture, standing in the middle of a candlelit room with nothing between him and her and the truth. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she moved to the edge of the bed, set her feet on the floor, and held out her hand. He crossed the room and took it. He sat beside her and her hand was in both of his, and he held it the way you hold something you have been looking for without knowing you were looking with complete attention, with the specific reverence of someone who understands what the finding cost and is not going to be careless with it. He looked at her hand, the calluses, the bandage white against her skin, the small cut on her knuckle from the combat circle that she hadn't mentioned to anyone. You knew about the Solaris line, he said, not an accusation. I suspected, she said. When the light came, I wasn't sure it would work. It worked. It worked, she agreed. He looked at her. She looked at him. The candle burned between them and the castle was quiet, and somewhere below the courtyard the chalk lines were still visible on the gray stone. I didn't come here for this, she said softly. I know. I came for Crestfin. Crestfin will be protected, he said. As long as I am king, it will be protected. He paused. I sent the riders the morning after you arrived, before the combat, before any of this. Another pause. I want you to know that. It was not conditional. She was quiet for a moment. Why? She said. He looked at their hands, at the particular way her fingers rested in his not gripping, not performing comfort, just present. He thought about the throne room and 47 women, and the specific, absolute silence of 300 years of feeling nothing, and the way 1 loaf of bread in 2 rough-palmed hands had undone every single wall he had ever built against the possibility of this exact moment. Because it was right, he said. And because you walked into my court with the only honest thing anyone had brought me in 3 centuries. He looked up at her. And I knew, the moment you held it out, that you were not giving me bread. She held his gaze. What was I giving you? She said quietly. A reason, he said. The room was completely still. Her free hand came up and rested against the side of his face, her rough, warm, work-honest palm against the scar on his jaw, steady and certain, and he closed his eyes for a moment the way she had closed hers in the corridor, just long enough to take something in that was too large for open eyes to hold. When he opened them, she was looking at him with those dark river stone eyes, and what was in them was not soft. Exactly, Alara was not soft, had never been soft. Soft was not what had kept Crestfin's petitions alive through 2 winters, and walked her into a king's court without an invitation. But it was warm, real and steady and warm, the way the bread had been warm, the way her skin was warm, the way the room was warm with the curse broken, and the candle burning, and everything finally allowed to breathe. He reached into his coat. The circlet was small old gold threaded through dark metal, plain and worn smooth with age. Not a queen's crown, his family's. His mother's, who had died before the curse, and had left it in a box in the East Tower archive that no one had opened in 300 years, because no one had had reason to. He had opened it this afternoon. He held it up between them. Not because of the court, he said. Not because of the law, or the precedent, or what yesterday requires today to look like. He looked at her. Because I am asking you, Alara of Crestfin, I am asking. She looked at the circlet. She looked at him. Then she reached out and took it from his hands, and instead of putting it on herself, she set it on the bed beside her, and took both his hands in hers, and looked at him with the level, unblinking attention she had given him from the first moment in the throne room. Ask me again in a month, she said. When the court has settled and Crestfin is protected and you have had time to feel everything without 300 years of pressure behind it. A pause. Ask me when you know what you're asking. He looked at her for a long moment. The muscle in his jaw worked. Something that was not quite frustration and not quite relief moved through his eyes. The specific, complicated feeling of being understood so completely by another person that there is nowhere left to hide, and finding, unexpectedly, that hiding is not what you wanted anyway. A month, he said. A month, she confirmed. He nodded, looked down at their joined hands. Then she reached into the pocket of her dress and produced a small piece of bread torn from the morning loaf, wrapped in a strip of red cloth. She held it out to him, 2 hands, the same gesture, the same quiet offering as the throne room, as the dais steps, as the moment that had started everything but different now, carrying everything that had happened since, the weight of 5 days and a chalk circle, and a broken curse, and a man who had felt nothing for 300 years, feeling everything for the first time. He stared at it for a long moment. Then something happened to his face that the servants who saw it the next day would try to describe for years afterward. Some would say he smiled. Some would say he simply became a person fully, finally, in a way that the crown and the scar and the centuries had been preventing. He took the bread. It was the only gift worth keeping, he said. He took a bite, and in the throne room of Dorveth, empty and quiet at midnight, the last of the cold finished, leaving not in a wave, not in a rush, but the way winter finally leaves, when spring is ready slow, certain, and completely without going back. Outside, the chalk circle on the courtyard stone caught the moonlight and held it. White lines on gray stone, the exact shape of where everything changed. If this story moved something in you, if you felt every moment of Alara and Kalem's journey, then this channel is exactly where you belong. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story that hits this deep. Every week we bring you worlds built on love that cost something, on characters who earn every moment of their ending, and on stories that stay with you long after the final word. Drop a comment below and tell us what was the moment that got you. Was it the bread? The chalk circle? The circlet he chose not to put on her head? Because this community is built on people who feel things fully, and your thoughts belong here. Share this story with someone who needs to believe that the right kind of showing up honest, unhurried, and without gold can break 300 years of cold. We will see you in the next one.